How many of y'all like detours? When you come up to something and the path just changes. It's not always fun. How many of y'all have ever followed your GPS and it took you in routes that were probably not the correct routes? Good 7 years ago or so, my wife and I got a new van and we were going to West Texas Youth Camp. And so West Texas Youth Camp is in the middle of West Texas. Nowhere. And so as we're going there, I punch in the coordinates in my GPS, and we left El Paso, Texas for a nice 8-hour drive. And so as we're driving through West Texas, it's beautiful country. And at some point, the GPS just says, turn here. I turn there. Then it says, turn here. I turn there. As I'm going, we go from an interstate to a 2-lane highway to a nice oil and chip road to now a gravel rancher's road. As we're driving following said GPS, it turns me on a little county highway. County highway meaning a 10-foot wide gravel path that goes through the ranch lands. As we go through there, we go through, cross a few cattle gates, and then we come up to a nice gate crossing the county road. As we're sitting there, my wife's like, I don't think we're taking the right path. I'm like, obviously we are. The GPS led us here. As we're looking at the screen, I look up and I'm like, that is the campground on that hill right there. I can see it. And she's like, we can't get there from here. So I'm like, she's like, call the district youth director. Have him tell you how to get there. I'm like, I don't need to do that. Right. I'm a man. I don't need to do that. That shows weakness. I don't need to do that. The GPS says it's just go down this road, turn left, go right. We're there. She's like, no. Eventually her logic won out. Unfortunately, it took a half hour of me going through this gravel road that was deteriorating. I'm driving a minivan on a road that required a 4-wheel drive truck. I turn around. Unbeknownst to me, when I turned around, I'd rolled over a pin cushion, also known as a cactus. It cost me 2 tires on that trip. All because I would not listen to my wife, and all because of a detour. Now, do we like detours? We don't always like detours, but sometimes detours are beneficial to us. Sometimes detours matter. And as we're going to look at something today, God takes His people on a detour, but it's for their good. And sometimes there's things that happen into our life where we hit a detour, where things change. We don't expect how they're going to happen, but we need to trust God to work through that. Because God has a plan, and we can trust Him and hold on to Him even when we face something that causes us to go, hey, what's going on? Why am I changing directions here? Why are we going in a different path? Why? Because we do have that question, don't we? When we get the detour, why? Why do I have to go this other route? The fastest route is for me to go that way. But if we look at this in Exodus chapter 13, verse 17, God has miraculously delivered His people. And it's pretty exciting. And He starts taking the direct route. Now, for some of you, you like to go to Easy's for lunch, Chinese buffet. It's located over by Walmart. Now, the direct way for us to go, if we were to leave the church, is for you to leave the church parking lot, and if you're adventurous, you can 4-wheel drive over the grass, but I don't recommend that. But you leave the parking lot, and you'll just drive out on Fair Oaks Drive. And Fair Oaks Drive being like all of, 600 feet long, but you'll get out on Fair Oaks Drive, and you'll drive, and you'll come through a little tiny intersection, and that will be Mill Springs, and you'll go past that, and then you'll hit a T, and that's Carlisle Avenue, and you'll turn to the left, because if you turn to the right, you're lost in the neighborhood. And you'll turn to the left, and you'll go down and wrap around the apartments, and you'll get down to the intersection, Carlisle Avenue. You'll turn right at the light, and you're like, duh, Mark, we know where we are. We've been going to church here for years. We're not lost. We don't need a GPS. But you'll turn right on Carlisle Drive, and you'll just drive down there, and then there'll be Easy's right there once you cross Green Mountain, right there on the left, and you'll be like, hey, we made it. Yes! direct routes. Now, with my dad, when I first got my driver's license, my direct route would have been different, because if he gave me permission to drive the car, I'm like, hey, I have permission to drive the car when I first got my license. So my direct route would have taken me all the way through West Belleville and all the way back around through Fairview Heights and then O'Fallon and then down that way. That would have been my direct route, because it's, hey, I get a chance to drive. But the direct route to get to that location, and God's taking them at first on a direct route. He's just like, hey, we're going to walk right that way. They walk right that way. They get to a large body of water on the direct route. And an army coming down behind them. And God miraculously opens the waters up, and they walk right across, and then God closes the waters up and destroys the army that's chasing them. And the direct route, if you were to follow it, then they're like, hey, we're at Mill Springs now. The next part of the route is just us go another block till we get to West Boulevard. See, I'm already lost. And so we get to West Boulevard. That's just the next step of the direct route. We're like, okay, God, you got this. Now the next direct route for us to get to the promised land is for us just to get up there, get to all the trade routes that head up through close to the Mediterranean Sea and follow that route up there, and we'll be at the promised land, and God, we got this all under control. It's going to be awesome. But God gets them on the other side of the sea, and He's like, no, I want you to turn right on Mill Springs, and I want you to head back to the back. And then when you get back there, I want you to turn to the right, and then I want you to wrap all the way around through the neighborhood until you get to the old Walmart. And then when you get over there, I want you to turn left on Carlisle Avenue instead of right, and I want you to wrap down until you hit East Main, and then follow that around until you hit West Main, and I want you to go that way and wrap all the way around the long way. Because I have a purpose for it. Watch this, Exodus 13:17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. I mean, God's like, hey, I got to avoid the whole Egyptian outposts that are all along the trade routes. And then when I go that route, not only do we have to avoid the Egyptian trade routes, the Egyptian outposts, because the Egyptians are going to be pretty mad about these people leaving. Then on top of that, there's a whole Philistine encampment that's all in that area. The Philistines wanted to go into Canaan and make that land their own too. So they're not going to let this whole group of people come through there. They're going to do all this stuff to push them down, to beat them up, to do whatever they can to destroy them. And the Israelites coming out of Egypt are not coming out as an army. They're coming out as a large group of people that have spent 430 years of their lives in a different land, in a different culture, much of it under slavery, and definitely over the last years it was intense slavery, horribly painful, horribly difficult for them. They came out of there most likely broken, hurting, wondering what's going on. Not as this large trained military force to take a new land. So they're coming out of that place, and they're marching out of there, and God's just like, hey, I have to redirect them. I have to change them because I've done some miraculous things. They have seen me do the miraculous, and it was awesome. The plagues that God protected them from, that destroyed much of Egypt with, He protected them. They just experienced God opening a whole body of water and allowing them to walk across on dry land, and then closing that water up. Crazy, awesome miracles for them to experience. But they, being like us, a lot of times when we go through that, we see God do great things, we're like, yes, God is awesome. But how many times then we see God do the amazing, and then a step later, something comes along and we're discouraged really fast. We're like, oh man, I give up, I quit, I'm done. And God's like, no, I have to protect my people from that. So I'm going to walk them on a detour. I'm going to redirect the path that they go on. Because God reroutes them to prepare them. God reroutes them to develop something in them that is necessary for what was coming ahead. Now, reroutes require time and patience. I mean, if you've ever ridden with somebody that got lost, doesn't that drive you crazy? Because you're like, great, now we got to rewind all the way back to where we were. And so it requires time. It requires patience as you're figuring out, where are we? How do we get to where we're going? Now, I never get lost because I always know where I am. The problem is, I don't always know how to get to where I'm going. But that's just me. Most of you can probably figure it out where you're going. But it requires time and patience so that God can work and do what's necessary in our hearts and lives in the situation. Just because the journey is different than expected does not mean God's not involved in what's going on. I don't have the big picture perspective that God does. God's able to fly over at 30,000 feet and see all the big details and see all the pieces and how everything goes together. I just see right in front of me what's going on. I don't have his perspective, but I need to trust him in all of that. Now here you have this group of people. They're new to the faith. Most of them had not a lot of depth to their faith. Most of what they had was just passed on tradition of, hey, let me tell you the story of creation. Let me tell you about how God worked in Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And they would pass those traditions on. But they didn't have the law like we know it. They didn't have all of that because that was going to happen soon when Moses goes up on the side of a mountain to talk with God. So they don't have all of that. They're fairly new to the faith. They didn't even have a deep understanding of who God was. God was revealing himself more and more to them at this time. So they're new to the faith. Don't we love the new to faith thing though? Because man, you're full of energy when something's new. It's exciting. You're like, yes, this is great. We love this. You want to see some people get excited? Take your grandkids that have never been to Disney for the first time. And that first day, they will be like, wow, this place is awesome. Or maybe if you've ever been there, you walk in and you're like, wow, this place is phenomenal. I love this place. It is fun to be. And everything's exciting and new, and you just love it because it's just like that with the things of God. When, man, it's new to you, you're excited, you're pumped, you're full of spiritual energy. Oh man, we can do anything. Man, I love it. This is great. You see those people that just come to the faith and they're just like, they just want to be there to pray. They want to be involved in everything. They want to do everything. They're ready to take everything on. But the one thing these individuals lacked, they had spiritual energy, but they lacked spiritual endurance. Because they didn't have a depth of faith. They didn't have a depth of maturity in their lives. God's like, no, I have to walk them on this path so that they grow deep, so that they learn to trust me and rely upon me. Because they're leaving Egypt probably broken. They're excited about being free. Hey, we no longer have to live this life anymore. We're no longer controlled by what Pharaoh does. We're no longer having to live where Pharaoh says we have to live. We're no longer having to do what Pharaoh says we have to do. We're no longer under that. Now we can go to this new land that God has for us, that he's prepared for us, and we can live the lives that God is establishing for us, and it's going to be awesome. But I'm sure there's brokenness as they leave that place. Just hearts that are broken, memories that are so heavy on their hearts and lives, and they need healing. And they're not prepared for the things that God has for them yet. Because they're going to have to go to battle. They're going into the promised land, the land that God's promised for them. And God promises to be with them, but it wasn't going to be easy. And so they had to be prepared for it. And I'm sure when you have up to 3 million people walking out of a country and going along, it looks like a formidable force. Where everybody else in the area is going to be like, whoa, watch out, what's going on? Who's that big group of people? So they're getting nervous. They looked like a formidable force, but they weren't a formidable force. They had the smack talk, but not the skills to pay the bills, so to speak. They could come out there and be like, hey, look at us! Look at all our people! We are something! Look how big we are! And then they'd be like, fight with a sword. What's a sword? How does that work? How do you break up into teams to actually move forward? How do you fight, defend, do what is necessary? How do you supply the army as they go out to combat? How do you protect the resources that are at home? They had to learn all of those things. They weren't prepared for battle. God reroutes situations in our life. God reroutes things because my heart and my life matter to Him. Who I am matters to God. My spiritual heart condition matters to Him. Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Or Jesus saying this in Matthew 5:8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Or Jesus summarizing the Old Testament, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. The word all in that is holos. It means without compartments. So it's love God with every aspect, every bit, all of your heart. My spiritual heart condition matters to God. What's going on the inside of me matters to Him. So God will use detours to allow depth to take place in my heart, to allow healing to take place in my heart, to allow work to take place in me, to prepare me for what lies at the end of the destination, at the end of the journey. So I learned to do my part and trust God to do His part. The Israelites experienced God doing so much for them to take them already to where they were at that point, but they were still going to have to do their part as well. One pastor I know puts it this way, pray like it depends on God and work like it depends on you. But God allowing our paths to switch and change and maybe meander and take us longer to get where we are hoping to be so that something deep can take place in our hearts and lives. But the reality is sometimes there's an invisible war taking place. A war on the inside that no one else can see. When we look at each other, we see the outside. We see the shell. We see how we present ourselves, how we dress, what we wear, how we talk, those things. We see the outside, but we don't always know what's happening on the inside. Maybe sometimes you know some people and you could be like you're a weatherman and you can give the weather report and you can be like, hey, it's calm storms outside, but there's a hurricane going on the inside. We don't always know. Sometimes there's hurt, there's grief, there's regret, there's anger, there's addiction, there's fear, there's sickness, there's a bad report from the doctor. There's something going on the inside that we don't see. We only see the outside. Sometimes when we come to church, we make sure we only present the outside. Hey, how you doing? Doing great. God is good. God is awesome. Life is great. No, really, how's it going? No, life is good. Life is great. How are you? Great. Because we want to present the outside to keep anybody from seeing the inside. But what happens on the inside matters, be it my thought life, be it my heart condition, my spiritual heart condition, everything that's on the inside matters. God takes that seriously. Because what's happening on the inside, it influences my decisions. It impacts my relationships. It inspires my actions. So I have to take seriously what's happening on the inside of me. And what is valuable, especially for us as a family of believers, is that proximity to people, relationships with people, exposes the real me. Because I can't pretend forever. So being around people is beneficial to me. I mean, Jesus said this in Luke 6:45 at the end, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. I mean, eventually what's on the inside comes out of me. So being around people is actually beneficial to me because as I'm around people, they get to know who I really am, and I have accountability, or I have people that are helping me. Everything, people being around me is good because the real me comes out, and we can disciple, we can be mentored, we can be changed. We have that accountability. This week I had a doctor's appointment. Had to go in and have just a procedure, test run and everything. And part of the process was they put me under anesthesia. And as I was thinking about that, my dad was just like supposed to take me there and pick me up. And then some plans changed and my dad wasn't able to come pick me up anymore. So he's like, somebody from the church will be there to pick you up. So then that makes me nervous because then I'm like, who's coming from the church? Are they going to show up? You know, I'm getting a little bit nervous about that because I'm like frustrated. And so then I got thinking about it. I'm like, okay, I've been around different people as they come out of anesthesia. And sometimes they say some crazy stuff. And so then I'm getting worried. I'm like, is that person going to be in the room when I come out of the anesthesia? And what am I going to say? What's going to come out of me? And then I remember as I was getting ready that morning to go and my dad to take me to the doctor, I'm sitting there, I just remember sitting there going, okay, God, okay, search my heart. See if there's anything offensive in me. Because when Stan picks me up, I don't know if I wanted to know the real me. I don't know if I want that to come out. I was nervous about that. But thankfully, none of that happened. Either God answered my prayer or there wasn't anything to come out. I don't know how that all worked. But proximity to people exposes the real me, and that's good. We need that accountability from people. We need that relationship with people so that they really get to know who we are. And we can be really open with them about what's going on the inside. This is what's happening. I can remember back when I was in my early 20s, my mom's dad, my grandpa Wilmsmeyer, died suddenly, unexpected. We didn't anticipate it. He had to go into the hospital on something minor, and I can remember being in the shower, and my mom walked up and she knocked on the door and just said, Grandpa passed away. And my emotions in that moment just went blank. I wasn't sad, I wasn't happy, I was just blank. And when the funeral came around, I was joyful. My grandfather loved Jesus, and he was with God forever. And that part was great. We had too much fun at the funeral service. And even as we were at the nursing home, at the funeral, I can't even think what it's called. What? No, before that, funeral home. As we're in the room there, everybody was just sitting at the front. You know how they put the casket at the front. Everybody's just sitting at the front. One of my friends said she had never been to a funeral before. So she's just sitting there, and everybody would kind of go through the visitation line and come and sit back down, and they're just sitting there, staring to the front. And so finally she just looks at me, and she's just like, hey, what's going on? And I'm just like, they're waiting for the movie to start. Because it looked like they were all sitting there. And it was fun. We all laughed, and then I got glared at by some adults, you know, and then we all left the room and laughed outside. That part was fun. But my emotions, though, were just dead. My heart was just cold to it. I was like, I couldn't cry about it. I was mad because my mom and dad were like, hey, you need to go visit your grandpa in the hospital. And I'm like, I don't need to go. He's just living there for something minor. It's no big deal. He'll be out in a day. So I was just like, I'll get around to it. So I never went and saw him while I was in the hospital. I never got that chance to even interact with him right before he passed. So I was just blank. My heart was just, I was like, I didn't know how to respond. And my friends are like, are you sad or are you happy? I'm like, I don't know, I'm just blank. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, we were all hanging out, a bunch of friends of ours just hanging out on a Friday night at somebody's house. And I was just like, I wasn't having fun. I'm just sitting there. I'm just like, this isn't fun. And so I was like, I'm just going to go home and just be in my emotional coma. And so I was walking out and I was getting into my truck to leave, and one of my friends saw me leave, and a friend came up and she's just like, she just stops while I'm getting into my truck, and I just open the door and I'm just looking at her, and she's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I just want to go home. And then she's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I just want to go home. And she's like, seriously, Mark, I've known you now for however many years you know me. And she's like, are you really okay? I'm like, no! And I just stood there for an hour, crying. Didn't talk, just crying. But it's because I had proximity, I had relationship with this individual, so she just knew me. So she knew how I was. She knew my expression. She knew all that. So she knew how to ask the question the right way to get to what was going on. My wife is skilled at this. Because I can come home from work and she knows if I've had a good day or a bad day just by how I walk in. And she'll be like, how was your day? Normal, fine. No, really, how was your day? Like, how did you know that? Because you can subtly pick up just the expressions of the change. And that's why we need that proximity with people, that relationship with people, so that we don't keep the walls up. Because we need each other. I mean, I like to use this all the time, just the writing of James. Is any of you happy? Sing songs of praise. Is any of you in trouble? He should pray. Is any of you sick? He should call on the elders of the church and pray for him. That involves relationship. It involves connection. It involves me opening up the outside so people can see the inside. I'm allowing my life to be a little transparent and vulnerable for them to see what's going on inside. God takes what's inside seriously. So he's like, with the Israelites, I'm going to reroute you so that your hearts can develop, so that you can develop a relationship that is deep with me, not shallow like you have so far. Because your heart condition matters to me. You're valuable. There's times when I have to get help. I need to share what is inside with trusted individuals. We're in this together. I mean, even think about how God views how we should approach Christian leadership. In Christian leadership, character is more important to God than competency. And competency is important, but character matters to God. How do you know the character of your leaders? Relationship, you get to know him. Even as you look at the Pauline epistles where it shows the characteristics of what a Christian leader should look like, you would know those by relationship. Is the individual good with his family? Does he love his family? Does he handle his finances well? All those different requirements is because of connection, relationship. We're in this together. There might be this war going on the inside. And we need to allow people to see that. We need to allow people to know what's going on. Now, when we continue in the story of those guys walking out there, God reroutes them. And then it steps on to chapter 13, or verse 19. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from Sokoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. One of the things I love about Joseph is 430 years before all this happened, he had faith and trust in the promises of God. He knew that God was bringing the people to Egypt to protect them from the massive famine that was hitting at the time. But he also knew God was going to deliver them from Egypt and take them back to the promised land that God had promised previously to Abraham, when Abraham, also a man of faith, trusting the promises of God, left the very home that he lived in when God said, I want you to leave everything and go that way. And Abraham's like, I will leave everything and go that way. Generations later, his great-grandson, or however that works for Joseph, Joseph's like, hey, I believe now God's going to take us from Egypt and bring us back to that land that is promised, and I'm trusting God to do it. With God, the best is always yet to come. It might take a long time, but that does not mean it will not happen. If God said it, if God promised it, then we can bank on the reality that it will happen. By faith, I trust God. By faith, even though I don't receive it yet, I see it, and I trust God to make it happen. I trust Him. And that's what I love. When this whole reroute's taking place, they don't understand, hey, the next step is this way. There's this little blurb there to remind them, hey, with God the best is yet to come. With God, He's got a plan that is working. It might have taken 430 years of wondering why we're in Egypt when the promised land's over here, why that's happening. But with God, the best is always yet to come. And then it continues, this reminder that not only is the best yet to come, but the reminder that God is with us. Chapter 13, verse 21, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, and that they might travel by day and by night. And I love this, verse 22. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. God's continual presence is right there. And for them, it was the Lord went before them. God himself is right there with them. I can only imagine what that was like. To have this gigantic pillar of God's presence right there in their midst. I can only imagine what that seemed like, what that experience was like. To have that direct landmark, or so to speak, that direct waypoint that they can follow that's right there to guide and illuminate the way. Or that sense of protection from their enemies right there. I can only imagine how awesome that was, and it really illustrates the both and of who God is. On one hand, you have that comforting, approachable, helpful Father God that you can be close to and near, that cloud. Because when we think of clouds just seem so just approachable, where you can hug them and squeeze them. I mean, isn't there even a toilet paper brand after a cloud? You love that just softness and the gentleness. If you ever fly in an airplane, you go through the clouds. Like me, I always have the thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could open the door and just bounce on those and float in them? That would be so fun. Unfortunately, I know enough about physics to know I would fall really rapidly. However, that aside, it would be fun. That's the approachable, and that's that side of God that we love, that closeness. Oh, Father God, I'm near you. I love you. Abba, Father, Daddy. But then there's that both and. The and God is awesome. In the sense of awesome. In the sense of amazing. In the sense of powerful, in the sense of unapproachable, holy, mighty, all-knowing, all-powerful. The sense of Isaiah getting near God and falling on the ground. Woe is me, I'm a man of unclean lips. Approachable, yet not approachable. The both and of God right there in their midst. Getting that perfect illustration of just the heart of God right there in them. And there's that pillar just right there. And God's presence does not depart from them. Constant guidance, 24/7. God right there. Yahweh, the promise-keeping God, was with them all day, all night, every night. Leading, guiding, protecting. Not just a symbol of God's presence, but God himself with them. And it changes for us as Christians because Jesus becomes our Emmanuel, our God with us. It changes with everything. Where for the Israelites, they had a temple representing the presence of God, representing the throne of God. And for the believer, our hearts, our lives, we individually become the temples of the Holy Spirit, where God takes up residence in us. He is the God with us. He's God for us. There's the God with us. It's joy unspeakable. It's that peace that surpasses all understanding. God with us. The God for us. It's the favor of God. God's favor, Mark Batterson puts it this way, that favor is the X factor between the best we can do and the best God can do. You matter to God. God is for you. It's God in us. The resurrection power of Jesus. God helping us. God desiring to be so near us that He's in us. Your life has value and purpose. Then we have Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, God's presence on us, empowering us for ministry, for evangelism. God working in us. and through us to reach people for Him. All of this, in the detour, they're reminded God is with them. And the best is yet to come.